online. Can you hear us? Okay, not sure. You can. Okay, good. Okay, awesome. Okay, so welcome everybody. So it's my pleasure to introduce Youness Achmani. He will be talking about implementing the commons approach on urban redevelopment projects, a discussion from the lens of spatial justice. So such a pleasure. So I will be moderating the discussion. So you have around 30 minutes. I would say only clarification questions in the process, and then more substantive questions after you finish the presentation. Okay.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the brief introduction. So I will present for you today the implementation of the commons approach on urban development projects, and we will make it the discussion from the lens of spatial justice. So this is my aim. So I can't move the slide now.
You can move the slides.
Oh, no, it's okay. So it will be enough. The story of the New York City planning decision concerned the eviction of the wholesale food merchants at the Bronx Terminal market, who were forced to leave their premises so that the market site could be turned into the development firm. This is the old building on the Bronx Terminal market. So the market, which lies on city-owned land, opened in the 20s and was renovated and reopened in 1935. Several of the last remaining firms could trace their origins back to those early days. The eviction they suffer from is the result of the rezoning process that followed the new development projects from industry to commercial land use. So this is the new projects, and with fancy shops to commercial, mostly are commercial. But before it was industry with all shops or wholesale shops. So the urban planning problem manifested in this case is the exclusion of the least will all from the decision making and from the space that are here. I'm talking about the merchant that the least advantages in this process. Both forms of exclusion could be assessed in different manners, but we propose to assess them from the lens of justice. This is justified by mainly two arguments. The first one is justice has two dimensions, the procedural and the distributive one. And the second argument is that the exclusion prevents a just and equitable distribution of resources. So this is here, we can see the idea of justice on both on the problem. Our research question is how and to what extent decision-making and control of the outcomes could prevent or promote just or equitable distribution of the resources in urban space production. This problematic translates the planning issue into an academic debate about the just and equitable distribution of resources. It's presumed to consider both outcomes and process to assess the distribution of the resources from the lens of justice and equity. This has been proposed by Suzanne Fainstein in her book, The Just City in 2010. Her formulation associates the political economy and political philosophy to answer two main questions. Under what conditions can conscious action produce a better city for all citizens? And the second question is how to assess that result would be truly better. From the political philosophy, she chose to discuss John Rawls and the principle of maximum, so to maximize the minimum for the least advantaged people, and political economy, she chose to discuss the capability approach of Amartya Sen. Thus, her formulation associates three principles of equity, diversity, and democracy, from which she derives principles that promote them and promote the just city. So whenever the principle promotes equity or diversity or democracy, those criteria, she promotes that's the just city. For instance, on the principle of equity, On the principle of equity, Fainstein credibly distinguished between the two terms, equity and equality. I think, I'm sorry, I don't know, but there is some missing type. I don't know, there is something missing from while I switch the presentation. Yeah, I don't know where there is the other slides about. Okay. There is like 3 slides missing here. Yeah, the slides are really presenting the Fainstein formulation of the just city and the principle. For instance, okay, I will discuss them without without really showing you. It's like some text, but it's okay. So, for instance, on the principle of equity, Fainstein clearly distinguished between the two terms, equity and equality, explained that equity refers to the distribution of material and non-material benefits from public action that does not favor those who are already better off. So this is the principle of equity. She is not seeking equality among all people, but equity that really favors the least below. This is the principle. Furthermore, it does not require that every person be treated the same, but rather the treatment should favor the most disadvantaged in society. This shows how Suzanne Fainstein really based her philosophy of justice on John Rawls' conception of justice and the maximum principle, In promoting equity, she lists 7 principles. For instance, all new housing development should provide units for households with income below the median. This is from economy. So wherever you subsidize housing, it's like really you concentrate on people who have income below the median. So this is other principle we can see, or we can find. Housing units developed to be affordable should remain in perpetuity in the affordable housing pool or be subject to 1-for-1 replacement. So if they construct some affordable housing, they have to remain affordable. So to promote the principle of diversity, she referred to the recognition of minorities, the abolition of discrimination, and in a word, the recognition of difference. So this is why she used really the capabilities approach and the empowerment of, the least advantageous communities. According to her, recognition is considered a necessary component of a just society, alongside with the distribution. So recognition is a part of the distribution, not only redistribution of the resource. So she lists 6 elements to promote this criteria. For instance, households should not be required to move to obtain diversity. So you don't have to move some people because we want a diverse community. This is not just for her. This is not a principle that promotes the just city. Another one is like, to the extent practical and desired by affected populations, land uses should be mixed. Here she refers not only on diverse community, but land use diversity. So something like not only housing, but commercials, some facilities, some service, and stuff like that. So this is her idea. And finally, Suzanne Fainstein developed 3 elements to promote the criterion of democracy. She preferred to say in developed Western world, which provide enough necessities to promote a just distribution of resources. So she is focusing on North countries, not South, because like they have more background or legacy on promoting democracy. For her, individual rights and freedoms are sufficiently preserved to ensure political activity and citizen activism, economic and social infrastructures have been already developed to ensure growth and efficiency. And the middle class still forms the body of society. I don't know if it's correct really in the real world, but this is how she justifies really when she wants to concentrate only on the Western countries. Okay, so for her, for instance, some of the principles are groups that are not able to participate directly in the decision-making process should be represented by advocates. She also said plans should be developed in consultation with the target population if the area is already developed. And finally, in planning for its inhabitant or sparsely occupied areas, there should be broad consultations that include representatives of groups currently living outside the affected area. Okay, that really seems really utopic because, yeah, okay, consultation, participation and everything, but there is some limits really. if you are making participation, it doesn't mean that they will be heard. Yeah. And this is why I'm choosing to concentrate more on the limits of Fainstein formulation of the just city. So referring to the case study of the Bronx Terminal market, the implementation of these principles also brings out a variety of solutions that seem to meet Fainstein minimum criteria. For instance, the status quo responds to the principle by which Fainstein tends to promote the just city. So it doesn't, yeah, you want to rezone the area, but if you keep those people there at the same location with the same zoning, it's promote the just city as well. So there is a lot of solutions. This is my idea. Second, the Bronx Terminal market's case is not atypical in that it emphasizes the production of the just city without giving further attention to the conflict or its subject. So her formulation is concerned more on what to do, the outcomes, not only about the conflict that occurred during the process. So, and her formulation focuses more on the distribution dimension, what I'm saying, distribution of resources, rather than the procedure dimension or decision making. The democracy process is no longer relevant if the conflict regulation doesn't follow the claims of different participation. So we don't have to talk about democracy while there is all during the conflict, there is a lot of people suffering from the decision making. So what is the democracy? This is my idea. So that's Fainstein formulation of the just city is more outcomes oriented than process oriented conception. This is my idea. The last argument is that the Bronx Terminal market shows that injustice is not always a matter of land use, but also a matter of access to the resource. When she talks about the just city formulation, she focuses more on the land use, what to do, like commercial, household, but not the access, who access to that resource, to that land, really. In other terms, while her formulation of the just city promotes just land use of the resource, it cannot provide an answer to just access to the resource. So for these limits, we propose to switch from just planning or planning for the just city to commons planning. This is because the commons approach is relevant to analyze the conflict and its regulation, besides the management of resources where different actors other than the state or the market intervenes. So this is why I propose to switch from the planning of just city to commons planning. However, this presumes considering the urban space as a common. So this is not really easy to just to say it. Okay, you switch from planning justice to commons planning, but you have to argue that that urban space could be seen as a common idea, which argue that the participatory approaches of different actors in the process show how the urban space could be seen as a common. So when there is the participation of different stakeholders on the process, this means like that gives you the idea of the collective choice within the urban space production. So that shows that we can really see the urban space as a common. This is only legitimate on a collective action analysis when the question is to define collective choice rules, for instance, land use or land allocation. So the reason, the plan at the end. The second argument is the right to the city of Henri Lefebvre. His idea or his right to the city is not a suggestion for reform, but instead a call for radical restriction of social, political, and economic relations, but both in the city and beyond. So his idea of the right to the city is like, it's radical, but we'll see what it's really encompasses. Key to this radical nature is the right to the city frames the arena of decision-making in cities. It reorients decision-making away from the state and toward the production of the urban space by inhabitants. The right to the city stressed the need to restructure the power relations that underlie the production of the urban space, fundamentally shifting control away from the capital and the state and toward inhabitants. So the right city really gives the power, not only concentrates on the capital and the state, but always for inhabitants. So the power of decision-making for everyone. The right to the city involves two principal rights for urban inhabitants, he argued: the right to participation and the right to appropriation. The right to participation maintains that citizens should play a central role in any decision that contribute to the production of the space. So he said that the right to the city or the right to participation, that's all citizens. He used citizens, not inhabitants or citizens. The different citizens in France, it means all, not only the citizens, but always immigrants, workers, everyone who lives around. Doesn't mean that you are like a French that you have to participate, but for everybody. And he used this citizen, it's great. Okay. And the second is the appropriation, the right to appropriation. The appropriation includes the rights of inhabitants to physically access, occupy, and use urban space. And so this notion has been the primary focus of those who advocate the right of people to be physically present in the space of the city. So the appropriation is more to be present on the space, to be present on the city. However, Lefebvre imagines appropriation to have a much broader and more structured meaning. Not only is appropriation the right to occupy already developed space or already produced urban space, it is also the right to produce urban space so that it meets the needs of inhabitants. So not only occupy the physical space that is already exists, but to produce the urban space that meets our needs. So this is his idea. It's somehow something, it's like, I think radical, but yeah, this is his idea. To conclude, urban space production could be seen as common when analyzed at the level of collective choice. Keep in mind that the commons approach associate both outcomes and the process. So it's associated really the outcomes and the process, decision-making process within the action arena and pattern of interaction that we will see later. To study how these two components interact, we rely on the IAD framework that really shows how the process and the outcomes are really linked together. Due to time, I will focus more on the action arena in the context of urban space production. So it's the middle component, action arena. Okay. It is composed of action and action situation. The action situation focuses on how people cooperate or do not cooperate in various circumstances. At the level of collective choice, three action situations are identified: the elaboration of the plan, okay, the instruction and approbation of the land use plan, and the implementation of the land use plan. Those are three types of action situation within the production of urban space or the city production, city making. Then there is the evaluative criteria component, which contribute to distinguishing between positive and negative outcomes. They are applied to both the outcomes and interaction among participants. While there are many potential evaluative criteria, some of the most frequently used criteria are efficiency, equity, participation, preservation, and sustainability. Those are among the criteria in which Ostrom will focus to evaluate the patterns of interaction and the outcomes. While we are interested in just and equitable distribution of the resource that benefits the least advantaged, we will consider only the criteria of equity as a single evaluation criterion to the IAD framework. Well, because we are really focusing on the spatial justice and the idea of the distribution or just equitable distribution. So we will focus only on the criteria, only the equity criteria. Okay, this is my idea. This means that positive outcomes are the ones promoting equitable distribution of the resource, while the negative ones prevent the benefits and opportunity to access to the resource for the least we love. So the negative and the positive outcomes is really distinguished from the lens of equity or how they lead to equitable distribution of the resource or not. In this context, we propose a formulation of spatial justice that we will consider and incorporate into the IAD framework. So when we use the only criterion of equity, it's like it gives you the idea of spatial justice. So in this side, we incorporate spatial justice with the IAD framework. The conceptualization of spatial justice articulates the principle of difference and the capability approach with conflicts to seek its regulation in a manner that benefits the least will of. So when we incorporate spatial justice to the IAD, it means that we are questioning the outcomes, the process, our action arena, and pattern of interaction according to the notion of spatial justice. Thus, the notion of spatial is a critique of the inequitable use of resources that favors private interests over those of the poorest. This is the conceptualization of spatial. I am defining spatial justice now. Here we can establish some indicators to assess both outcomes and process. In the process, the domination, the repression, and the exclusion of the least we love in the decision-making are among the procedural forms of injustices. So spatial injustices during the process are really the domination, exclusion, and repression of those groups that the least we love during the process or during the conflict. This is the idea. An unequal distribution of the resource, involuntarily segregation are indicators of unjust outcomes. So here I'm developing indicators on spatial injustice during the process and the outcomes. And in the process, it's like domination, repression, and exclusion, and the outcomes is like segregation and unequal distribution of the resource. In the case of the Bronx Terminal market, the merchants were excluded from access to new development projects, particularly from the public action that benefits that follow the land use modification. So the merchants in the case of the Bronx Terminal market, who are the most disadvantaged, were excluded from the benefits of public action benefits. So there is exclusion, which is an indicator of procedural spatial injustice. The merchants were dominated by the new developer and its interests, since their claims to remain in situ were not considered or heard. The outcomes of this operation are the exclusion of the merchants from the space, and the resource was unequally allocated, since the new project unjustly limits the access to income for the merchants. So at the end, who benefits is really the private developer, and unequal and it limits really the access to the resource for the merchants. This exclusion comes from an exclusion of the decision-making process in which they were just consulted and not heard. Thus, the Commons approach and the IAD offer this lecture on how spatial injustices reproduce themselves through a combined analysis of both processes and outcomes. So the IAD shows you that the production of injustice is really a cycle. It's produced and they reproduce themselves through the process of decision-making. And this work, we start by defining the planning problem, which is the exclusion of the least we love from the space and from the decision-making. I propose to associate it with the academic debates on justice, which encompasses the discussion of Suzanne Fainstein's formulation of the just city. Through its limits, we propose to consider the Commons approach to urban space, which is legitimate in a collective choice analysis, and considering the participatory approach and the right to the city to justify how the urban space could be seen as a common and before applying the Commons approach. For this reason, I want to end by referring to the three levels of analysis: constitutional choice, collective choice, and operational choice. Our focus has been on the collective choice, since we consider the urban space could be seen as a common on a collective choice level of analysis. But we can extend the debate to the operational level, even if sometimes it's analyzed much with the collective choice, mainly between the approbation and implementation of the land use plan. Another point is related to the relationship between the operational and constitutional levels of analysis. This relationship offers some insight into policy proposal and decision-making rules. the analysis could start by why the merchant need to win. In this case, not why there is like unjust distribution of the resource. This is the proposition from them. He could argue that why the merchant could need to win, and then you have to argue not from the theory but practice and some arguments from the practical case study. This is different from the planning culture in civil law countries in France, for instance, where the constitutional analysis contributes to a policy proposal. So with the result or unjust result, we can propose a policy proposal better than like a decision from the court, and to show the court that they need to win in this case. So this is the difference from common law and civil law. So this is the end of my presentation. So I would really love to hear from you some any question, but before I would give some credit to everybody. First, I want to thank Vincent and Eleanor Ostrom for their legacy in terms really for researchers and also for the working on the workshop. It helps a lot to endure really researches on social sciences. I'm really grateful for everyone who is in the research field. That's really, this workshop works really, really good for everyone. Then I want to thank everyone who joined this research session remotely or in person, and everyone who contributes to this work, Nicole, Mike, and Scott, Gustavo, and all the folk that will contribute later, in this discussion. Finally, I would thank everyone who assessed me to make this travel, Gail and Cody, and for all the administrative staff, David, Carrie, and Emily. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. So the floor is open for questions. Mike, then you should first.
I've trained myself over many years here to ask a question.
So just one thing, so people that are online, so it's again, you can just raise your hand or just put your question on the chat, so whatever you prefer.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the presentation. We had just talked a couple days ago, but this gave me sort of the bigger picture of sort of what you're trying to do. One of the things that you included in Fainstein, your summary of Fainstein's work, which I'm not familiar with. And I want to sort of get a clarification here as to whether I understood what you were saying and why that was important criteria and whether you're applying that criteria. You said something about, she thought that diversity should extend not just to the participation or land use rather. Land use is more than just the distribution of resources, but really deals with whether you have a diversity of land use in a given area.
Yeah.
So you're saying that in any one neighborhood, you want to be able to have people both have dwellings where they can live, places where they can work, places where they can shop, get groceries. Yeah. So you want and do recreation of various kinds and all that. So you want that sort of in every neighborhood of a city?
I was just presenting her idea.
So that's her idea.
Her idea of
okay, so why does she think that's an appropriate consideration? Given how diverse different neighborhoods are, different parts of the city or different parts of the environment are.
When she was studying, formulating her idea of the just city in London, New York, and Amsterdam, she saw, she noticed that wherever there is social problems, they are really located where there is areas without real facilities. This is why she advanced to this principle that said, okay, there is like not only land use diversity, but always diverse on terms of communities. And this is why it's like a principle that comes from the experience or investigation from the case study that follows in Amsterdam, New York, and London.
But she is referring to things like there's food deserts. There tends to not be good grocery stores in minority communities in the United States where you can get good food, rather than plenty of 7-Elevens where you can get junk food, but not many groceries where you can get fresh food and stuff like that. And that's sort of a manifestation of sort of a distributional injustice.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and the same thing that hospitals maybe are placed a long distance. We had a big issue here in this city when they moved the hospital from downtown to out, so on, on the air, the bypass, so it could be accessed more easily, but the people in the communities in Bloomington, are a long ways away from them, and certainly a long ways away from where the homeless shelters and people are hanging out and stuff like that. So that was sort of, that was an economic development decision made by the planners here in Bloomington that generate a lot of resistance in terms of causing, an injustice, if you will, or inconvenience, at least for citizens, inner city residents who, or at least for that part of the city, were the more impoverished sort of areas. So I see sort of the logic of spatial justice. But I also see a real problem in trying to use the Ostrom's approach to look at that. I don't know how much you've looked at Lynn and Vincent's work on urban politics. At one point, they wrote a paper in the 70s on trying to provide advice on how Detroit might revitalize their community in the 70s. It was an unpublished paper. And as it turned out, Detroit didn't do anything of what they recommended at all. Okay. But they did Detroit did actually do some things that work. And I don't really know the detail. But the problem was that Vincent really didn't like planners. And he really didn't like urban planning of any kind, or planning of any kind. He was a very strong opponent of planning. I mean, he was particularly concerned about the kind of central planning you would have in Soviet Russia or Nazi Germany or China in the Maoist period, primarily. And they still have it. China still has a pretty extensive planning program in their governance system, so pretty far away from what the Ostrom is sort of working. So it sounds to me like what you're trying to do is you said you're trying to set up a notion of commons planning. And I presume planning by the members of that commons. But that's sort of combining two things that, at least within the Ostrom tradition, are totally contradictory. The planning is something that's done by somebody for somebody else, to plan how the city is going to be involved. So there's that separation between the planners and the people. And the commons sort of, that Lynn studied, the common for resource communities she looked at, or locally based management regimes, were governing and managing their own resources, but it's not like they were gathering to work out an extensive plan on how to arrange things. They were just sort of solving problems. And yes, there's planning to the extent that we want to make sure this resource continues to be available for us and our children and our children's children, and that we have enough resources to live good lives and be sustainable and stuff like that. That was sort of the extent of planning. There wasn't really, in the cases that Lynn looked at, much of this effort to try to make every little part of the commons the same or have the same distribution of resources or activities. It's almost like trying to enforce a uniformity of ideal diversity in each sort of component of that. Whereas Lynn and Vincent would have emphasized much more the intrinsic physical diversity and variability of different physical spaces. There are some areas that are really good or used for farms, and there are some areas that are not. Okay, so you don't want to put as many farms in the bad areas as you do in the good areas. You want to match your uses to the nature of the physical environment. That's really where the IED framework comes in. You're taking cognizance, you're taking account of the physical characteristics you're dealing with and the community's needs for that community. You're trying to match those community needs to what's possible in the environment and try to set up rules that make that sort of match. But you're not trying to make everything look the same all the way across. And so there's a homogeneity bias sort of in I think the way you're looking at it. And it's not your fault, it's coming out of people like Feinstein and I think, is that there's, this unanimity that you're looking for this ideal sort of arrangement rather than what I think the Ostrom's are more concerned about, just finding something that works. Okay, and so you've a couple times you've been somewhat skeptical of these sort of utopian plans that are laid out in here, and yet you're still kind of doing the same thing. So how are you going to reconcile this disjuncture here between these ideals, unrealistic sort of ideals that are being laid out, and the practical things that the people involved are primarily concerned about? They're not necessarily interested in making their city or their neighborhood into a city on the hill that could be seen as an example throughout the world. They're just trying to make their life better. And that's a much more mundane sort of thing. So how do you draw that connection? I know there's a lot of stuff buried in on there, but I really see a fundamental disjuncture here in what you're trying to do. And especially if you try to draw on the Ostroms too much to do that, because you're kind of moving in a direction opposite from the way they would have wanted you to move, I think.
Yeah, I can understand the idea, how you see even the urban space here in the American culture. I can understand it's more on private property or the state intervention. But my idea is to see the urban space as a common, which is legitimate from, the participation of different actors, and even from the whole affair, or the idea of the right to the participation and the right to appropriation. So yeah, I can see, the bias, because all of them, they are really contradiction between them. So whenever you take wholly fair idea, it won't be like the same idea of Fainstein, what she wants to produce. This is why I started by Fainstein criticizing her idea of just a la carte, we have to do, we do like this. No, without really intervening or looking at the interests of different people on the conflicts. So this is my idea. And the second point, I think you were saying how I'm managing the commons or the IAD framework onto the planning process. I think this idea. So from the lens of wholly fair and the participation process, really the legal framework on participation, I think it is an ideal to make not only participation for as an objective, but really like a tool to make really raising the conflicts and the interests of different parties or stakeholders during the process. So it's really more focused on the process, and it's not only to make the process participatory, but the participation is a way to raise the interest of different stakeholders on the conflictual situation. This is my idea.
If I can follow up real quick, the way you answered that question, let's be asked my question a little more clearly. If you talk about the commons planning as you're conceptualizing, it has both a process component and sort of a distributional of the outcome sort of component. But if you but the process one is more important to what you're doing in the distribution, because it's been underemphasized by these other people, and you're focusing on commons as process, and that's fine. That is very consistent sort of with the other. But once you open up the process and let the people directly involved make decisions over what sort of plans and what sort of changes they're going to revise here, there's no reason to expect they're going to come up with an answer you like. There's no reason they're going to come up with what either of these authors would see as a just city or what you would see as a spatial justice sort of situation. They're going to come up with whatever they come up with. Okay, and so there's kind of an inconsistency there in assuming that you open up the process, they will come to the answer that you expect.
Okay, I understand now. Oh, okay, that's great. That's a great point. This is why I'm raising really the idea of the spatial injustice within the process. We don't have to dominate the least we love. This is my point. Okay, they will come up with a solution, but that solution that has to deal with the interests of the least we love. not only just the interest of the private, like what we see in the Bronx Terminal market. The solution at the end is like favors only the interest of the developer. They don't care even for those who the renters, for instance. And this is the point. Yeah, there is more on the question of on domination, exclusion on during the process of the lease will of. We have to consider them like not just okay, you participate, you say something, and okay, tomorrow we'll decide either between us. No, you have to consider their interest. This is the idea of procedural justice.
Okay, thanks.
So okay, I'll go with the question. So I don't know if people on the online want to ask some questions. Okay, so
Like there's
somebody here on the table.
There's some people in the chat.
Oh, there's somebody on the chat. Sorry, I didn't realize that. So it's like maybe it was an early thing. So
Yeah. Some, oh my God, this is a lot. Okay.
so somebody I cannot read. Sorry, but oh
Yes.
can you ask the question by?
You asked the person sent it to.
Oh, okay.
So,
Can you hear me? I think that was my question.
Oh, good. Could yes. Sorry that we missed that. So could you ask the question? So I'm sorry that we cannot reach. I cannot read the chat unfortunately from here.
Oh, you cannot. Okay, let me read my question because fortunately I printed it out. So
Also, thank you so much.
You're welcome, and thank you for your presentation. I'm so excited by it. It's wonderful, and it's very timely. So my first question, and then I had two comments. My first question was, I'm in the Los Angeles area, and I'm an architect or a recovering architect. So I've been in the trenches on this work for a very long time, as you can see by my gray hair. So my question is, how do we take these ideas and implement them? And so, for example, in Los Angeles, we have a very aggressive, I would say, real estate and financial industry, all of which are monetizing land. And then our public agencies are fiscalizing it because they get revenue from taxes and transaction fees and so on. So there's a real implementation step that we need to think about together. And that would be demonetizing and defiscalizing land use, I would say, in urban environments, point one. And then point two, somebody mentioned food. Well, increasingly, we're not going to be able to get our food from out there. We're going to have to grow it here. So there is a local regenerative food production need. And then in terms of organizing, there are community land trust movements, and obviously there's work of people like David Bollier and so on, who've articulated approaches. So my main question is, how do we implement this, and what are some of the pieces of it that incorporate food, energy, water, incorporate land tenure, incorporate community organizing? So those are my questions and comments, which is a little bit scattershot. So what do you think?
Yeah.
Thank you.
For your question. Yeah, I've heard about one case study from the Metropolitan Transit Agency against the bus riders union. It's called it's a case study from Edward Soja, if you know him. So it's the court decided in favor.
His wife is an architect. Yes, I know him.
Oh, yeah. So you know, what I'm talking about. So in this area, I think in this decision, it looks like the decision favored the interest of the bus rider and who take the bus. So this is like a decision that favors the interest of the lease willow. So if we take it as an illustration, this example, it's really a call to be engaged during the process. Really, this is the solution. If you are waiting to someone talk in your place, there will be no solution to promote spatial justice. So it's this is why Henri Lefebvre is really seen as a radical, because he is favoring really to revolute or against the decision from the top and to include the least we love. And this is the idea. I don't have like a magical solution like, okay, we have to do this. This is like a solution from Fainstein, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work like we have to do this. No, you have to really to get engaged during the process. If there is a process to some land use change, you have to intervene. You have to make like organizations organize and making a community to defend your interests. This is my point, I think. I hope I contribute to answer to your question.
Do you want to
I don't
re-ask something? I think it's Arlene. Sorry, I can't.
Yeah, Arlene.
Arlene, do you want to follow up on that? If you want, feel free, please.
Say that again, repeat, please.
Do you want to follow up on that, like extra comment or extra questions as just as a follow up to his answer?
Well, yes, of course. Well, his answer is wonderful. And I'm very impressed actually that you know about the Bus Riders Union. Yeah, they're fairly obscure in certain ways. And interestingly, he's an attorney and she's an architect. And they've not been very successful actually in the big picture. But I think that the theory is very interesting and has a lot of usefulness, but practically we've got to figure out a way, I think, to implement. And I think ownership of assets, meaning land, means of production, is very important. I think this whole system of rents where Wall Street bankers and investors own property and extract rents is not going to help us. I think we need to make sure that the commons, the community, includes ownership of the assets and the means of production, if you will. Because if I understood you correctly, you were speaking about the flows. You were speaking about flows, but not ownership of assets and control and management of assets. Is that accurate?
Yeah, accurate, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so we have to own it, because if we don't own it, we don't control it. And I'm also formerly a planning commissioner in my community. I live in Santa Monica. This town is ruined. It's ruined because we have so many investors here and they're all maximizing their profits at the expense of the community. And I'm not the only person who shares that point of view.
Yeah, this is the problem. Yeah, all the time the big actor wins really, and this is really again. This is why I'm using the commons as really theoretical background to implement the idea of spatial justice. I remember when I was in Italy, whenever we talk about spatial justice, say, okay, you are educating activists. No, we are educating really planners, because yeah, social justice, spatial justice, like the left. No, it's like really the problem that we face in the future. When you exclude people in the process all the time, there will be like a huge problem in the future. This is the problem. So we are not educating just activists, but you. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank
You're
you for your.
welcome.
Thank you, Arlene, for your questions and comments. Very, very interesting. So I think I have a comment / question that's to some extent connect with Mike and also to Arlene. I was thinking that essentially a city is in some sense a very weird common, because usually when we're talking about like a traditional commons, we're thinking, well, the community managed that common, okay? And essentially the first thing that the community can do is to avoid the tragedy of the commons. And one way of doing that is at the very least excluding others to enter it. So essentially it's not an open access thing. It's kind of closed system to some extent. Once it is closed for an outsider, then you start managing inside the small community, okay? But the city is almost by definition an open system, no? So essentially it's like people can move, and even if you take out foreign migration, you have internal migration or immigration. So that's a very, very different animal in some sense, no? And then the second thing is that my view is like, maybe we want to even, I have mixed feelings about giving a lot of decision power to locals in the following sense. It's good in the sense that they could manage and solve some local problems, but we also observe a lot of cases in which it essentially expropriates those that could move to the city implicitly, because those are not voting or participating, okay? So it's very easy to come up with rules that will manage, that essentially maximize the rents of those that are already in the group at the expense of people that technically they have the ability to enter into the group, but essentially you're doing a lot of things too, they cannot enter into the group, okay? So maybe if you are thinking like this is a bigger picture thing, the city is an open system, maybe what we want is like a little bit of, I don't know, maybe a polycentric thing in which the cities can manage some things at the local level, but there are some constitutional limits on what they can do, so they do not expropriate some external players. Because Arlene, for example, was, I think, mentioning, investors that are coming and doing something, but you also have, poor immigrants coming to the city, okay? And we have observed a lot of zoning laws and rules that have systematically expropriate those external players, no? So again, it's a common slash. So I don't have an answer. It's really kind of real, true, honest mixed feelings about how we should think about this problem. And still in terms of justice, because I'm kind of respecting the rules of engagement that you put in your paper. This is essentially a justice problem, okay? Even in those terms, without talking about growth, efficiency, blah, blah, still, I think you have potential trade-off there, no?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's a great thing. That's really great contribution. I will tell you, okay, the community is really evolving on the city. From the beginning, when there is like the already developed, for example, the community could be like the owners, but on the collective action, the community is large because there is a lot of actors who intervene to produce that space. And in the end, at the operational level, it's like, yeah, the rights are really distributed. When Eleanor Strong works on forestry, she is really distinguishing the rights for all the community. And she is really talk about the user. The user is large, is open as well. When there is the user or entrance, you have just entered to the forest. It's like for everyone, it's like the city. You have just to enter and do nothing. So to occupy the physical or the urban space, this is a right like at the same, it's like equivalent to the right that we have on the forest. We have just to enter, but other rights that could be really distributed within the urban space. And this is the idea. So when we talk about the city is really like the community is so different and evolved from when we want to make or the city making process, like the community is really evolving within the process. Within the process, the community is like really large. And I'm talking about more actors, more than community. But at the end, when the land uses are really fixed or determined, when we can talk about the community, which is really, yeah, somehow limited because there is the right that are distributed. Like, for example, someone who has the right to build it's a part of the community. But when we talk about the urban, the public space is owned for everyone. And this is like the idea of the community is evolving. Yeah.
Just a follow-up.
Yeah.
My question, one way of reframing is like, so who is everyone? Because everyone could be just the ones that are residents right now, or everyone could be those that are residents right now and those that could be potential residents next year. And that's a very different group potentially, no? So it's again, so for example, it's like again, consider Bloomington, no? Just we have very different residences, like maybe, I don't know, people that are coming as faculty that expect to stay in the city for long periods of time. I don't know, Mike, for how long have you been in Bloomington? Or maybe you have students that are expecting to stay for 4 years in the city. Or maybe there are new things that are developing and they require, housing for I don't know, lower middle income class, whatever. And then essentially, it's perfectly possible. I think if you study history of urban development, you will find a lot of injustices of essentially local residents doing a lot of things, essentially to increase their rents. And then once you start checking, I know that there were some internal losers, but the main losers are potential entrants. Okay, so those were the big losers. Also, so it's and that was kind of my concern. How should we deal? Should we allow? So imagine that in some neighborhoods you could come up with some very nice decision process. So think about what happened here in Bloomington in Vinegar Hill. I think if you allow the residents of Vinegar Hill to make some decisions, I think they will heavily restrict in developments in low income housing. And that will be a democratic, I bet that it's going to be like, I don't know, 75 to 25% majority decision with all the nice decision process. But then that's a problem for a new person that wants to move to Bloomington and is looking for affordable housing. Yeah? So those things could happen. So that's why I believe the two-level thing is, hey, you know, decide at local level something, but there is some limits on what you can do. And that I think could serve justice. That's kind of my point. So it's we need to put some limit on local things in order to go to more. So it's also to focus the local things on more equitable things and stop those political processes at the local level that will go in the direction of less equitable alternative, you know, something like that. Okay.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, because you are asking really how to define the people and how they talk about citadin. I explained how citadin is not only citizens who live there, resident like 14. No, for everyone, workers, immigrants, and this is what really brings into the debate, like all the people. All the people, it means like inhabitants, students who come over. This is the production within, you know, the process needs to incorporate all the needs of all the citadins. For example, you are living here for 3 years, you have to intervene, to engage yourself for the community. So this is my point. So he's using the citadin more than inhabitants or citizens, and this is great, really. And
yeah, so maybe that's
and respond to the housing crisis for immigrants that just come up and don't engage themselves. But yeah, if there is no or lack of affordable housing because you don't participate or you don't, there is like only people living there, they don't care about the process, but you have to intervene yourself to say, okay, we are living, it's so expensive. So you have to engage yourself and make your interests really heard within the process. Yeah.
So maybe there's room. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go, Mike.
Because I think this will tie up a couple sort of points. I like your connection back to Lynn's study of the forest. And in forest resources, you have some people who are, you know, actively managing the forest, who are using parts of it for food, for sustenance, for grazing, for growing crops, for whatever. And then you have others who are interested in coming in and simply coming in and maybe taking some wood that's fallen, you know, some twigs have fallen off the trees for use in fires. Or got mushrooms or whatever, you know, but they're not really involved in doing much maintenance of that. So it's similar to this notion of people coming into the city to enjoy it for a few days or a couple of years here in Bloomington, but they're not really as committed. Well, the rules that these communities come up with reflect those different roles. And so the people who are just kind of coming in to look at the forests or take the mushrooms, they usually don't have much of a role in running the forest. They don't participate in the forest governance. This is in Lynn's work. These are the ones that work. I mean, it's appropriate for the people that have more invested in the area to be more involved in managing it. So just because they're all using the forest, some are using it in ways that are more directly important for their livelihood. And others are just using it for more trivial sort of purpose. So again, why do you expect that all of those groups should have equal rights to participate in the process?
I
mean, it's a commons, but people are using it for different purposes, for different levels of intensity and importance to their lives. And so shouldn't how important something is reflect some way in how involved you are in actually doing the governance?
I will make it like the same. how you think that in the case of the forest, those participants, all of them, they have the same rights. It's like the same. It's like
No, they don't.
they don't have. It's
They do not have the same right, not at all.
Yeah, at the city.
And that's the commons.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the commons. They have different rights.
Yeah.
The same people, it's the same people having access to the commons, but they don't have the same rights. Different types of people have different rights.
Yeah.
And they have different rights to participate in governments. And so you're conflating the idea of a commons and thinking that if everybody has access, then everybody should have equal access, which is not the way most commons are set up. And they should have equal access to participate in governance, which is not the way most things are set up in this community. So the goal, this ideal goal of having equal access for everybody to everything doesn't fit even the kinds of things that Ostrom found work very well for communities.
And this is, I like to challenge, but I will challenge you more because what do you think about the right to the city equal to the right to ownership? How you compare them? Because in the urban space, it's not like the commons on the forest, like you can compare it's about engagement, the management of the resource. But the urban space, you have just one right to participation. How you compare it with someone like just owner who don't want to participate? It's like, it's a challenge of right. This is why it's less really on the value of exchange or the use. There is, those notions, the value of exchange and the value of use. And he is more of the value of use more than exchange because, okay, I think in the commons you can trade your rights or in ownership, private, you can trade your rights. But on the urban space, in collective action, you can't trade your rights because it's collective actions. And more important is the value of exchange. It's not more of the value of use. And this is the point.
Okay, unfortunately, we're running out of time. So thank you for all for the participation. And then just a couple of announcements. So it's like we have the environmental policy lecture almost now, so in 1 hour, okay. And then on Monday we have another colloquium. So essentially you are welcome to join to both activities. And thank you for following. Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you all. That's amazing.
It's amazing to follow up with all the. I was opening the web page because I'm missing some event. Yeah, so we have some.
We never had to do the sort of that much remote participation in running these.
Yeah, so it's
a different problem.
Yeah,
Good job.
so yeah, I'm really bad introducing people. So it's like my default is like I read your name, your affiliation, and the title of your paper, and I want you to start talking. But then it's a little bit unpolite.
The tricky thing in this role, really, say I've done it for times.
It's true.
Is getting the conversation started on.
It's true. I should.
Trying to not focus in on some narrows, but to try to get the bigger sort of picture. And then that lets people come in. Her comment.
It was good. It was awesome.
Followed up, and then I think, there was a
Yeah. So it was a good dynamic. So that's nice. So it's
see you at the 2 o'clock session.